Whoa is in our anime. Are you tired of those vocalizers and localizers ruining your sacred anime, but you don't want to learn Japanese? Well, sorry about that. So, around the time I was finishing up with my big localization video, I wanted to look at some other instances of modern subs or dubs containing words people don't like. Instances covered by, or potentially akin to the ones covered by outraged merchants like Reps as Desu, Yellow Flash 2, and the like. I wanted to see if they're as bad as the frankly indefensible Dragon Maid and still pretty dicey prison school dub lines from the mid-2010s. I remember there were two I wanted to go over, those being instances from BokuYaba and Fuufu Ijou. Boku no Kokoro no Yabayatsu, or The Dangers in My Heart, is a romantic comedy about an edgy middle schooler who thinks he has the heart of a serial killer while fantasizing about murdering the popular girl in his class. Said girl ends up interacting with him, and over time, the kid's posturing fades as the two get closer. In episode 10, there's a scene where the main kid, Kyotaro, is explaining why him wearing black clothes is probably different compared to the main girl, Anna, wearing black clothes. For her, a pro-fashion model, it looks all stylish and cool, while for him, it's more of a matter of process of elimination than picking what looks the best. He then realizes, shit, I just started explaining fashion to a fashion model. Or in the original subs, this. Now I should mention at this point that I don't really know Japanese. Since in his Discotek video, Dimitri Monroe showed the Japanese characters for some Samurai Pizza Cat lines and satted them out before showing the apparently censored versions, I decided to hit up some guys I know who speak the language. Here's the original line in Japanese characters, as well as Romaji, so you can see how it would sound phonetically. Yes, I'll do the same for Fuufu Ijou, and I'll also give you what both people directly translated said lines into. The translation I was given for the line on screen was somewhere along the lines of, not gonna lie, at first I didn't think the subline was so egregious or awkwardly out of left field that it demanded change. An awkward, still somewhat edgy and reserved teen boy is probably familiar with the concept of mansplaining by the interwebs, especially since he's a guy explaining fashion to a woman who already knows this shit and whom he should know already knows this shit. Technically speaking, you could argue that's what he did, even if he didn't intend it, and even if Anna probably didn't regard it as condescending or patronizing enough to really count. On the outside looking in, the lines seem theoretically in character, and technically appropriate, even if the more literal or direct translations would have been safer, less potentially intrusive alternatives. Still, if a remotely politically tinged line inherently takes you out of the experience, then that preference should be respected, even if it's very much a subjective preference worth acknowledging as such. The same goes both ways, naturally. In theory, this seemed to be a pretty harmless line, though even back then I could see why they changed it, even if I didn't think it was that big a deal one way or the other, and this will be better demonstrated by the next example. All this to say, I admittedly haven't seen BokuYaba, and I have little context for the character himself or the scene itself, though one of the people I ran this by, Sato, disagrees with the line far more than I do. Both of the people I talked to generally find the inclusion of the word mansplaining to be a little out of left field, and from what Sato was read of the manga, it wouldn't even be in character for Kyotaro to say. If that's the case, then this initial mansplaining line is closer to the Dragon Maid incident than I thought, since it's a misread of the character being given the line of dialogue, on top of it being an unnecessary change in general. It lends more credence to the idea that the translator let their political lens or bias inform their understanding of the character. Or worse, the idea that they let it slip in there while disregarding whether the character would even say said line to begin with. At that rate, yeah, no wonder they had to change the line. Now for Fuufu Ijou. Fuufu Ijou Kobito Miman, or More Than a Married Couple But Not Lovers, is a wish-fulfillment romantic comedy. This one's about a gamer dweeb having to live with a pretty gyaru from his class in a year-long school assignment for senior year high school students. One male classmate is paired up with a female classmate in a fucked up assignment to try to act like a married couple, and the ones who perform the best in each quarter are allowed to change partners. Jiro's had a crush on someone else since middle school, and Friend who's been paired up with a popular male student who the gyaru Akari has a crush on. Naturally, the gyaru Akari dismisses Jiro a lot, repeatedly calling him and his male loser friend virgins. The dub doesn't always opt for virgin, however. Here's the line I've heard some pushback from in episode 1.
You two have fun at Incels Anonymous.
For reference, the direct translation I was given was, and the sub opted for something much closer to that than the dub line. Now I don't necessarily agree with this change, but I can see why the ADR director or scriptwriter thought it was fine. I've seen the show in its entirety, and I can confidently say that this is pretty in character for Akari, who is actively riling Jiro up in this scene. That, and it's a pretty typical modern day setting starring 17 to 18 year olds. Doesn't throw me out of the experience, as it feels at home with Akari's lexicon and attitude, on top of it just being realistic in general. Sure, there's an argument to be made that even outside of just keeping the line the subs had, there are probably better, less potentially intrusive alternatives. It's a much tamer version of what happened with BokuYaba, except this one happens way earlier, and if I'm being honest, I don't even like the first episode of Fuufu Ijou to begin with, and I can see why the dub line just further turned people against said premiere. Both of the people I spoke to definitely felt that the line was a little politically charged for their liking, but one of them still added that the Japanese word dote is a non-universal insult for males in general, and that technically speaking, both virgin and incel could suffice. I do consider the line defensible in context, and far better than the patriarchy and Gamergate lines of the mid-2010s, or even the BokuYaba mansplaining line, now that I know the context behind that one. Hell, it's also better than the social distancing lines I talked about in Kaguya-sama Season 2 back in 2021, as it doesn't come off nearly as clunky in context. And in any case, this is certainly less egregious than, say, that new RPG whose localization's been making the rounds. Yeah, like a month ago back when you wrote this, you slow fucking dickhead. Now the entire conversation has come and gone, you molasses-ass piece of shit. Eiyuuden Chronicle 100 Heroes dropped with a fair amount of downright egregious lines that don't even seem to make sense for the characters to say in context of their scenes, or their fucking facial expressions for that matter. Probably the worst example of this is the muscle-brained Chud line. And if I need to explain why that one is bad in this fantasy RPG where a character seems to be referring to another as a meathead, then all hope is lost. Actually, yeah, no, all hope is lost because some dickheads have decided to co-opt the issue and turn it into a race issue. You know, because some people are just fucking racists. This includes the types of folks who love to rush to cover localization snafus, such as Scratchpoint looking at Lovely Complex. Now, instead of talking about the dodgy localization of the last RPG made by the late Suikoden creator, Yoshitaka Murayama, it's about why a black character in RPG was a bad sign, or how anyone who's played his games knows that they have a fair amount of black characters in them. The conversation has been pivoted into a purely culture war matter, because some of these people don't actually care about localization nearly as much as they do about hating minorities in or around their media. They hate the quote-unquote woke as much, if not more, than they care about actual principles or issues of quality. That's what people like Scratchpoint are like sometimes. People like Black Sage D, Hero Hate, or Dimitri Monroe. They're outrage merchants and reactionaries, maybe even grifters depending on the individual or who you even ask. Some of these people have been at the forefront of the localization conversation, and any other drama or issue pertaining to Japanese media, or media in general. They often do so with bad intentions, like making the West, and especially black and LGBTQ+ folks, into scapegoats and boogeymen for why media is the hashtag bad and tarnished, or just straight up misrepresenting facts and information. This is what the conversation of 100 Heroes localization is pivoted towards. Scratchpoint in particular fills out the racism and transmesia card with the post I've shown. It's not just the edgy jokes, people. I'll reuse the Black Sage D tweets thrown into my previous video. And then there are those like him who tried to turn the existence of a main female lesbian couple in Gundam The Witch of Mercury into a culture war while claiming that the quote-unquote woke has gone too far in said war and that these outrage merchants are just trying to stop the fight. Thankfully, the wider Gundam community recognized this bullshit for what it is and never let that shit take off. It's just become fringe resentment. We knew not to bite too hard into it, and instead focused on welcoming newcomers and discussing the show as a new Aiyou in the tapestry of the Gundam franchise. Though since we're on that topic, I do want to discuss it a little, seeing as we're not exactly at a point where we need to let bad actors drag the conversation of said work from legitimate issues with overseas distribution to the representation depicted in the work's history, like with 100 Heroes. Gundam has never been a stranger to non-white, non-Japanese, or even non-cishet representation. Notable examples include the Universal Century timeline as a whole, Turn A Gundam, whose timeline is its own can of worms, Jireku, whose timeline is also its own can of worms, the Anno Domini timeline, and the Build timeline, which is also the Anno Domini timeline, but that's a different one. Fuck it. As far as female protagonists and pilots, deuteragonists, tritagonists, or main character pilot ensemble members before which, we have Double Zeta, 0080, 8th MS Team, Twilight Axis, Gundam Thunderbolt Season 2 and the second arc of the manga onwards, Gundam Build Fighters Tri, Build Divers, and Build Divers Re-Rise. Hell, even see Destiny Onwards counts. Sure, the only one with a female pilot as the de facto protagonist prior to which is Twilight Axis, an anime nobody watched or liked. But the point is, Gundam has had this precedent long before Witch of Mercury. Not to mention any mecha fan worth their salt can name a whole bunch of other mecha anime that have at least some of this stuff. But anyways, back to localization. If we want an example of bad faith in the localization discourse that didn't result in a conversation pivot that distracted from the actual focus, let's turn to a video Dimitri Monroe dropped towards the end of my last video's production. This is the Discotek media vid I talked about earlier, discussing its supposed lies. I ended up watching and discussing with a few people, and one moment that really stuck bad was him talking about the Lovecom situation and how apparently they compromised the show by hiring a ton of trans and non-binary voice actors. Hell, he downright calls it
hiring people not for their talent, but an arbitrary thing they write in their Twitter bio.
And said that one of the many changes or vandalisms towards the show was how
the entire dubbing cast was compromised because of him and Lenti, which was approved by these companies.
You can debate how proper this methodology of casting is, with them looking for primarily one demographic in the VA talent pool, and casting many of them who auditioned for the trans character Seiko in other roles. However, the way Dimitri Monroe puts it here really says it all, doesn't it? It's stuff like this that calls Dimitri's intentions and credibility into question, as well as that of the more talking head type outrage merchants. Hell, the way Dimitri interacts with sources can be kinda questionable in and of itself. One example would be when he said that
Gel made a point that from the start, he was brought on because of the frustration that was already being felt toward the anime script. This was the goal of the company, not a one-man mission.
So first off, on what you see here, there's a section that is not underlined, where Jello specifically says that he volunteered to help out with this dub. You know, meaning he wasn't even getting paid for this shit, he just wanted to get his foot in the door. Sure, Marissa and Sound Cadence at large could have just rejected his volunteering at any time, but that doesn't change the fact that he joined of his own volition, rather than him just being brought on because everybody hated the show and wanted it changed. He just so happened to be working with the one person who also wanted to see some changes to the show. So framing it as the goal of the company, as we'll see further, isn't exactly accurate. More pressingly, if you go back to the top of the document he's referencing, the third paragraph points out that the Sound Cadence CEO, Amber Lee Connors, purchased the license to dub this show because Lovely Complex was an old favorite of hers, and Discotek didn't want to commission a dub for the show. It very much implies that she and her company footed the bill for this dub, or at least made sure Discotek didn't have to cover all the expenses on a project they were hesitant to commission themselves, due to how expensive a dub can be. That and the dub was made at least partially on favor calls and volunteer labor. Marissa Lenti, and especially Jello Apocalypse, wanted to alter the dub script to suit their personal tastes, and make the show more palatable to them, sure. However, to call it a goal of the company as a whole, it's pretty disingenuous and hard to believe, especially since if that was the active goal, you'd think that all of Jello's changes would have made it in, instead of just some. It doesn't stop Marissa Lenti's decision making from being frankly terrible, like making so many changes that obfuscate or water down the original intentions of the work, and letting this Jello guy hop on in general. An anime dub, especially a comedy dub, should generally be allowed a bit more leeway and creative liberty compared to their subtitled counterparts, and frankly, this very much tracks with the market demands and expectations. However, we can both at least agree that this dub wasn't the best effort, and that the ethos of Lenti and Jello should not be considered acceptable when it comes to localizing even anime you don't like. Lenti and potentially others in the pipeline at least had some standards compared to Jello though, but there's an air of disrespect that I imagine Amber had to at least work to mitigate. Honestly, a point that could have actually strengthened Dimitri's case in a vacuum is the fact that Amber played the main lead, Risa, so she absolutely saw a lot of the changes firsthand, and only maybe voiced concerns along the way, in case things were going too far. On some level, this may have given a bit more credence on the surface, even if ascribing malicious intent to the whole company, both ignores immediately identifiable aspects of the document Dimitri actively cites, and frankly feels fallacious in its own right. I did miss this in my own localization video, so I can't wag my finger at Dimitri too much for not drawing attention to it in his Discotek video without sounding hypocritical and therefore damaging my own credibility. However, that doesn't detract from the point here, and it doesn't detract from the idea that, hey, maybe she did voice some concerns. There are other questionable aspects of this video, like neglecting to mention that the Anime News Network founder and frequent collaborator Justin Savakis left ANN in 1999, a year after the site's creation, and over a decade before Justin would found video and BD/DVD producer Media OCD, which works with companies like Discotek. Framing localizers, people and companies who deal with anime distribution, companies who defend either, and even minorities represented by or working along with general entertainment as a malicious cabal takes precedence over accuracy and the proper presentation of facts in these people's eyes.
These people are vile,
Dimitri says. They don't just mishandle art sometimes and smugly insert their beliefs where they don't belong, even though those actions are bad enough that repeat offenses should result in the removal of their positions. No. They're malignant, evil, a conspiracy set out to destroy anime from the inside with wokeness and Western values.
They're right. I and many others have been vindicated several times throughout this video, and it's just adding to the pile.
Even if we agree with the localization being dubious or problematic, or that sometimes ANN or localization people can operate in fishy ways, there's still too many instances of bad faith argumentation and presentation for me to vibe with the overall output and ideas they're putting forth. It's not too surprising given how the title and thumbnail of one of Dimitri's localization videos is... yeah. It's also not too surprising when the targets of this shit are liberals working in pop culture. And as much as lefties hate libs, people skewing right tend to hate them even more. And that's where the culture war comes in. Liberals and works that may appeal to them or to people beyond a nation's majority exist, and people beyond a nation's majority exist in pop culture. When some of the loudest, most vocal voices on the localization conversation engage in bad faith bullshit on the regular, or just try to use other demographics as scapegoats, it's hard to consider these people credible or worth listening to. They don't care about accurate, good faith, or productive analysis. They care more about the culture war, the agenda, something they at least sometimes correctly accuse their enemies of doing. Even when they get some things right, it's better to be vigilant about their statements and intentions, and take their words and evidence with a grain of salt. That or just look for other, more knowledgeable and good faith perspectives altogether. Otherwise, like Asmongold, you'll find yourself vulnerable to those who engage in sophistry. Otherwise, like Underdog BT and the like, and honestly just most left-leaning Twitter types, you'll engage with them on things other than a good faith conversation about the mechanics and distribution of media more often than not. That or you'll engage in willfully ignorant behavior like frankly most of the vocal players on both pro-localizer and anti-localizer groups have done during the Lovecom debacle. Seriously, trying to argue that Katrina's actions and ethos on Inukai aren't remotely like Jello's on Lovecom because one's a professional and one's an interlocutor is like, dude, be fucking serious. Most of you motherfuckers on this convo and the censorship convo and other bullshit turned into political optics games just care far more about your own side and owning whoever you hate over just fucking reality. Just don't fucking listen to any of these people. You saw what they did during Stellar Blade and Hellblaze 2. They're just so If you want some informative, varied, good faith perspectives, why not check out my big localization video featuring the likes of Pause and Select, Shaves, and a whole bunch of other people. Oh hey, I'm doing the YouTube thing, guys. Like, share, and subscribe and all that. Ring the silent red bell and donate to my coffee to give me money. 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 Give